Book 2, Chapter 4. You try to think about what is being said, quickly recall the words that were bobbing up and down in the drink, connect a memory of the sentence that was formed. You enjoy telling stories about the band, but it feels odd. Book 2, Chapter... Oh, I just started reading Chapter 4, so it's a good thing I started over. Book 2, Chapter 3, Weasels in a Box. There are miles and miles of haze for every inch of ground you have traveled for the last, 15 years perhaps? Sure, 15 years sounds about right. There are hazes that have increased with the temperature while traveling through the desert. Arizona, behind and in front of you. The Malibu is in danger of breaking down in the 120-degree temperature. There is no air conditioner, and the car's heater is at full. A technique often used on tours to keep the engine from overheating. This technique does not, however, protect the defenseless band members inside from hazardous levels of heat stroke. You roll down the window. The boiling wind hits the skin on your face and quickly begins to tear through levels of epidermis. Now you know what it's like when it rains needles. The humorous phrase from your first album gains new meaning as you roll the window back up. What kind of world are you in where you can't even enjoy the wind blowing in your face like a happy dog with no thoughts of destination or death in the process? The Malibu, owned for years by Little Old Lady and bought by Mr. Famous for $2,000, had more personality and determination than all 13 band members who have passed through the band like happy dogs with no thoughts of destination or death. 10,000 miles it traveled on that tour alone. A year earlier, it traveled from Chicago to Berkeley and from Berkeley back to Chicago in less than a week. Of course, you and Mr. Famous made that trip too. Well, that's something to be determinedly proud of. The Malibu is unfortunately long gone, but the two of you are still around like bewildered dogs with overwhelming thoughts of destination and death in the process. The Chevy makes it to Phoenix a little after 4 a.m. Everyone grabs what they need for the small remainder of the night and heads to the door of the promoter, hoping that he is home, awake and cool enough to allow the band to crash on his floor. Being not yet semi-famous at this point, it is hard to determine whether or not a promoter cares a rat's ass about your band. From town to town, there seems to be no predicting the band's past or present effect on individual scenes. Will you have the same 7 people show up to your show this time, or will hundreds of punks crawl out from beneath the surrounding suburbs just to see your band play? Sometimes it takes just one high school kid searching through a bargain bin at the only local record store to create a domino effect that turns a dead music town into a thriving punk scene. Sometimes the venue begins spontaneously in a kid's basement. Eventually it moves to a theater, bar, or rented hall. The events become predictable. The social aspect begins to shadow over the energy of the music. The audience loses interest, and the bands are no longer important. The scene shrinks, disappears, and the town is left with a handful of punks searching for another place to begin the whole thing again. It is hard for the self-promoting bands to keep up with the constant shifts. You never know what to expect as you walk up to the door of a new promoter. Mr. Famous rings the bell. Moments pass. Mr. Famous rings the bell again. You hear footsteps, a crash, and "Ow! Fuck!" And then the door opens. The promoter kid, a kid by your standards, stares through the screen door. "What the fuck?" he says, which is more of a bewildered greeting than a hostile exclamation. You say, "We're the band. I'm Bedbug. This here is Mr. Famous, and those 2 boys sleeping on their feet over there are Vittles and Muddle." Everyone stares at each other. A few moments of silence descends upon the scene for no real good reason. Mr. Famous looks at you. You in and shrug, and then he talks into the screen, touching the wire net with his nose and lips. We drove all night. Is it cool to crash here? There's a screen door back home. It leads into the front of your house. It is similar to this one. 2 panels. The top, a screen. The bottom, a thin sheet of glass. As a child, you ran toward the door, the left hand out a little farther to catch the lever to swing the door outward. After years and years in the same house, it became second nature, like tuning a guitar before going on stage, or reaching for the handle of the van door while your eyes are buried in an itinerary notebook, or the little slap you would give yourself after hours of sitting awake in the shotgun seat. On one particular occasion, your foot catches on the stoop. You fall forward. Your arms crash through the thin sheet of glass. Your mouth smashes against the wire mesh. There's glass sticking out of your wrist. The blood dribbles from the scratches. There's a slight oozing around the shard stuck close, but not in the main artery. You were lucky. Sometime later, from the inside, you look out through the mesh into the yard. Your mother's foot is burned. She is crying. Moments earlier, brother runs from the kitchen with a frying pan full of fires and flaming grease, and he opens the screen door. Mother is in front, talking. She tells him to throw the pan away so the flames won't hurt him. He tosses the pan haphazardly. The grease splatters and lands on your mother's shoe. It burns a hole. The grease melts her skin. She is rushed to the hospital. Years later, your mother is dog-sitting across town. Mr. Famous is living in your basement. Friends of the band spend the day sweeping and mopping the floors, washing the windows, trimming trees, mowing grass, drinking beer, and barbecuing veggie burgers and corn. It is a strange event. Fun is had cleaning simply because the respect everyone has for your mother and her kindness. It is a day right out of the life of Tom Sawyer. During the night, a group of punks are standing in the yard drinking beer and munching on stove-popped popcorn, and you are discussing Douglas Adams with a girl named Lainey and another named Nadia. Nadia. That's actually the names. A few people that are in the book with their actual names. The phone rings. You run across the lawn, step onto the stoop, grab the lever, swing the door outward, and smack yourself in the face with the corner of the door. You fall backwards and bump your head. The phone continues to ring. You get up, run into the house, pick up the phone. There's a dial tone. Oh, that's strange. A phone continues to ring. It is your neighbor's phone. You laugh a little at yourself, of course, and then look at the receiver. There is blood. The blood drips down your face and onto the phone. Your right eyebrow is split open. Days later, the party continues onward. You are inside. You open the screen door outward. There are 2 people on the porch, supine, staring up at the stars. Supine, that means like laid flat, I think. Or suppin. I think it's supposed to be suppin. I don't know, I'll look that one up. They are holding hands and occasionally kissing. It is your ex-girlfriend of only a month or 2, the one with the freckles and the beautiful smile, the one you loved but couldn't help but distance yourself from. She is pictured on the inner sleeve of your first record. The Complete Unknowns make a record. She is immortalized, printed in the band's history. How could she do this? How could she bring him here? That's Mickey, and Mickey's best friend was Portia, and Portia actually, we both dated. I dated Mickey, and Portia dated Ben, and then Ben and Portia got married, and then the marriage was annulled many, many years later, and now he's married again with twins. Anyway, this is about Mickey. She met him while you were on tour. The phone rings. You turn to face the door, and for a moment you have the instinct to bash your forehead against its edge. But it is not that important to create a scene. You shut the door. The phone continues ringing. Errol is on the other end. He is stuck in Florida with Eggert. You hand the phone to Mr. Famous. As he reaches for the receiver, the 2 of you disappear and reappear with Muddle and Vittles standing in a stoop in Arizona. Mr. Famous talks to the screen, into the screen, touching the wire net with his nose and lips. We drove all night. Is it cool if we crash here? Fuck yeah. Come on in. Muddle rubs his eyes, fights a yawn. Our cards. It's over here. And before he can finish the word heated, the yawn forces its way out of his mouth. He doesn't bother to finish the sentence as he enters the door and immediately falls to the floor with his sleeping bag. Everyone sleeps for a few hours till the bright sun destroys the cool peacefulness felt in the desert. This morning begins with a single voice. It becomes a constantly retold and reinvented story. It's a military voice, tense, energetic, painful, and irksome. It thrusts you out of a small unit of sleep you do not recall, and yet cannot deny, because how can a body wake without having slept? "Morning, sunshine!" Standing above Muddle and Vittles, the voice has given itself a frame, half silhouette and half boot camp drill sergeant. He is not to be confused with the promoter of last night. That fellow no longer exists. He was burned into a heap of compositable, undefinable ashes and instantly replaced by this agile, militant, crew-cut Phoenician. I guess that's basically my way of saying that I can't remember the guy that let us in. And then the only other memory I have is this guy in the morning. He is probably a roommate. The band will always remember him as Morning Sunshine. He is one of the shiny, happy people destined to kill others and perhaps even himself. Give the man a war before he turns the local mall into a rifle arcade slaughterhouse. Muddle, shocked, awakes and jumps to his feet, rubs the crust of sleep from his eyes with his left hand, and clenches his right fist. You can see the veins in his forearms, his instincts teasing his brain. He holds back a punch, perhaps unsure about matching his strength against Sunshine's, or perhaps unwilling to put the band in jeopardy. Either abstention is possible, and it's more than likely that both happen side by side. Morning Sunshine smiles, says nothing more, and walks to the door, swinging his keys. He turns toward Muddle, releases his keys. They spring forward and then stop like a yo-yo, spinning in Muddle's face. Muddle begins to protect his eyes. The keys snap back into a retractable, attachable belt receptacle that hangs on the side of Morning Sunshine's pants, opposite the leather knife pouch. He salutes. He exits. Morning Sunshine lives for an eternity in your brain. Muddle laughs to quiet his anger, and you, still under your quilt, laugh along with him. Vittles joins in. It is a good moment. For a while you try to get back to sleep. You lay there in the cool air conditioning, staring up at the peeling paint. Someone is in the next room, slapping their knees and making cymbal crashing sounds by pressing the tongue against the teeth. I can't actually do it. Vapid is actually really good at that, because this is Vapid I'm talking about. You know damn well who it is. 15 minutes later, the peeling paint disappears from the head of Muddle, Vapid, standing above you, staring into your face to see if you are awake. Do you have the keys? I got to get my guitar. It's a pattern. He plans on turning the slapping and the cymbal crashing into a song. It is a frustrating pattern that constantly happens within an ear's distance while the rest of the band is trying to sleep. Your irritation quickly becomes indifference. If it weren't for these early morning inspirations of his, who knows when he'd have time to write the catchy-as-hell melodies he's known for. So you deal with it. A forced indifference. Mr. Famous often peeks his head out from his sleeping bag and yells, "Shut the fuck up!" But not this time. He's awake in the kitchen drinking coffee and talking to the people that no longer exist for you. You hand Muddle the keys, roll back onto the side of your face, and notice his bare feet as he exits out into the streets of Arizona, the desert state. Mr. Famous walks into the living room. Where's he going? Before you can answer, he walks over to the window, makes a sound that can only be described as prophetic and sarcastic, and then, what the fuck? Muddle, dehydrating faster than he can sweat, is punching the back of the car, hopping from foot to foot, jabbing the keys toward the lock, and yelling, "Fuck! Fuck! Fuck!" He's fucking barefoot. As you get up to look, you say, I know. Muddle is barefoot. His heels and toes melt impressions into the molten tar. The rest of the band is now watching from the air-conditioned house, staring at him through the living room picture window, with humorous disbelief. A few more fucks vibrate their way through the glass along with thumps from muffled, fleshy kicks to the bumper, rising steadily above the dwindling laughter. The comedy turns sad. You throw socks on, don't bother with the shoes. Someone needs to get out there before the man hurts himself. End of chapter 3.
Hold me, warm me, won't you comfort me? Hug me, it makes me feel so good.
Life is full of good reasons to give someone a warm hug.
A warm hug from Campbell's. Good.
These are short 2 chapters in a row, so this is going to be a 2-chapter day. This is book 2, and now we're on chapter 4. Sometimes you remind me of Muddle. How do you mean? The bass player from the Boys from Wyoming stuffs an onion ring into his mouth. I have trouble relating to people I meet through music on a personal level. Something in my brain tends to separate my friends outside of the band from the people I meet through the band. I don't usually become close friends with the ones I meet through the band. This is another reason why I wrote the book, is because I really feel this about myself, and I thought it was a fault of mine back then. I don't know what I was thinking, but I just never really associated with a lot of the bands like everyone else in our band did. Like, that's why I never got to really know Green Day or any other bands that we played with all the time, that even stayed in my house. I tended to talk actually more to the audience. I don't know, I just I enjoyed that more than talking to the other bands, and I've tried to alleviate that a lot over the years by doing my podcast and just trying to keep connections going with people from bands that I knew back then, like Aaron and Jeff from Crim Shrine and Jesse Michaels from Operation Ivy. So anyway, back to the book. I'm going to read that. Okay. So after that, Cory says, who is the bass player from the Boys from Wyoming, so what does it have to do with me and Muddle? Oh, nothing. I guess, you just both make me laugh. And you both acknowledge the fact that I'm funny, even though neither of you seem to know what I'm talking about most of the time. That's strange, Jack. Have you ever thrown keys at the trunk of a car and then kicked the bumper in your bare feet? No, not that I ever can recall, but it does sound like something I'd do. Well, then there's that too. You take a sip from your drink and place it on the table. The chef sets the cheesesteak down in front of the bass player from the Boys from Wyoming. You say, "Dig in." The bass player chuckles a bit, rubs his hands together, prepares himself, and then picks up his sandwich. As you are about to lift up your drink for another sip, little, pointy, and circular-shaped objects begin to float to the surface of the cup. Is it food, or white, elongated bubbles bobbing up and down? Look closely. There are little words in the liquid, like alphabet soup. What does it say? You begin to read the words. When you pronounce a word, another appears in its place. We got pulled over by the cops in Wyoming. Once. The bass player from the Boys from Wyoming looks past the sandwich raised to his face and responds with his mouth half full. He assumes you must be speaking to him, even though you are looking down into your drink and talking incredibly slow. Your voice reverberates off the circular wall of the cup. He believes it is more polite to respond, whether or not you are talking to him. He would rather take the chance of dropping food from his mouth so that he can continue the conversation than to just stare at you and nod. Oh, yeah? What for? You look up from the drink and are taken slightly aback by his voice. Were you speaking out loud? What? Why were you pulled over? He takes another bite. Yes, you were speaking out loud. Yes, you were speaking out loud. You are having a conversation. You try to think about what is being said, quickly recall the words that were bobbing up and down in the drink, connect a memory to the sentence that was formed. You enjoy telling stories about the band, but it feels odd, as if you are talking about another life. So it takes something dramatic to happen, like words forming in a drink, for you to talk about the earlier days of the band. I think... speeding. Or just for looking suspicious. It begins to flow smoothly. You are recreating a memory that had been lost. Ah, yes, we were touring across the West Coast on our way to record our first record on Lester's label. That's Larry Livermore. This is your version of name-dropping. You use it only when there is nothing to gain. My brain hurts, right? What? What? The flow temporarily comes to a halt. I can't understand what you said. You understand what he just said, but you have no idea what it means. Chew first, then speak. Your first record on Duck Records with Lester. My brain hurts. What does he mean? Your first record on Duck Records was called The Most Less Unknowns Become Semi-Famous. Do you even have a record called My Brain Hurts? There's so many records. 12 or 13, something like that. Are all of these still secure in your memory? Sure they are. You know there wasn't one called My Brain Hurts, but perhaps it was a bootleg of some demo tape or a 7-inch on an obscure label or a name of one of the 1,000 compilations floating all over the world. At one time, the band was being asked at least once a month to participate on a compilation. It very quickly became tiresome. My Brain Hurts. It sounds like the name of a Screeching Weasel record. They were a contemporary punk band from the Midwest. Look at me, this is so meta. I'm talking about my own band as if it's a different band. I tickle myself pink. Screeching Weasel. They were doing pretty well for themselves until the guitarist got himself run down by a drunk driver. See, that's, for all of you know, that's a reference to Ben's book Like Hell, where he kills me off. Or something like that. They still put out a few records afterward, but it just wasn't the same. There was a commercial for Best Buy advertising a record of theirs called My Brain Hurts a Lot. In the commercial, a gang of homeless, anarchistic, nihilistic, no-good crust punks are standing on a street corner, drugged out and picking their noses. One of the punks with a pink and green cotton candy mohawk turns to the camera and says, "If Best Buy sells Screeching Weasel, I'll get a job." He says this because he is a punk, and punks don't have jobs. It is the last thing a punk wants to do. Most punks don't even know what the word work means. Punks are lethargic and downright stupid. So the only bet a punk will make concerning himself and a possible job has to be one with incredible odds in his favor. But what's this? Best Buy does sell Screeching Weasel. How radical, how MTV of them to criticize the very people they are trying to get to consume their products. And so it goes. And so is the way, the guiding light. In the next scene, the homeless, anarchistic, nihilistic, no-good crust punk who was standing on a street corner drugged out and picking his nose is now standing behind a counter of a fast-food burger shop in full uniform, and yet still sporting his mohawk, because how else would we recognize him in the burger uniform? He is selling burgers and politely saying to the customers, "Welcome to Burgerland. May I help you?" He has a job now. How ironic. We all know punks don't have jobs. But if they did have to get a job because of a bet or a dare, it would have to be selling burgers. Even those eccentric, crazy, pale vegan punks have no choice but to sling meaty burgers for cash. And the most important point is, how else is he... Wait, I lost that. And the most important point is, how else is this punk going to afford the Screeching Weasel record from Best Buy if he doesn't have a menial job? It's brilliant. Except that most, if not all of the crust punks across America, and perhaps abroad, don't care much about Screeching Weasel, or Semi-Famous, or Mr. Rogers' Delusion, or Angry Samoans, or Swindle Parlor. Most of the crust punks prefer the old school type bands like Sex Pistols, the Presidential Debauch, the Damned, Social D, and so on and so forth. See, this is where I was having fun, where I would mix real names with fake names, like Sex Pistols is real, but the Presidential Debauch is, it's the dead Kennedys. And then I got Mr. Rogers' Delusion, which was my take on the Mr. T experience. Angry Samoans, of course, are Angry Samoans. Anyway, I think that's kind of fun. And Social D is, Social Distortion, so that's really kind of their name anyway. Anyway, this misinterpretation of generalization of style as music has helped to boggle the minds of people who do not listen to punk rock. At the end of the commercial, a record spins into the TV screen and comes to a halt. The Best Buy theme song is cued, and the voiceover begins, "Screeching Weasels, My Brain Hurts a Lot, available at Best Buy." Did Screeching Weasel know Best Buy was going to use their record to appeal to the young consumers of punk? It was strange to see on television. This was before Billy Bob's band BC Pills hit it big and started a mainstream invasion into what would later be called the pop-punk scene. This sort of music just didn't appear on television ads. No Sex Pistols or Ramones, blue light specials at Kmart, or songs of the Angry Samoans or Me First and the Gimme Gimmes used to sell cornflakes or a Buick. The Best Buy commercial may have been one of the first, albeit minor, examples of the mainstream pop-punk explosion to come. Actually, I'm going to say, if anybody finds this commercial online, if they could post it in the comments, that would be great. That's one of my favorite records. What's one of your favorite records? My Brain Hurts a Lot, or The Most Less Unknowns Become Semi-Famous? You just want to finish telling your anecdote before it vanishes or begins to sound ridiculous or gets lost among a dozen or so sidetracks and analogies, so you decide not to question the bass player from the Boys from Wyoming's question. Yeah, sure, that's the one. We were a bunch of freaks in a rundown van that Dred's friend bought for $5. We upgraded from a $2,000 '76 Chevy Malibu to a $5 van owned by a friend's friend. $5. Piece of bread falls from his lips. You hand him a napkin. Yes, it was worth every single penny. Until it broke down on the West Coast, but that's another drink. What? Another story. So, anyway, Dred's friend, Skinky. Skinky and I both had scraggly, oily, long hair. We looked like California peace and pot hippies. Well, he did. I looked more like a stone 70s rocker meets 80s new wave cokehead. Actually, my sister and all her friends said I looked like John Bon Jovi. Mr. Famous was sporting his short Robert De Niro-style mohawk a la Taxi Driver. Dred's hair was spiky and bleached blonde, and Muddle had a jet black flat top. Thurston Breeze just looked like a geek and would be kicked out by the time the band gets home, just for being a geek. Or Motley Crue doesn't sound so extreme now that I describe it to you, but this coupled with punk stickers coating the back of the rusted van, the Butthole Surfers, Circle Jerks, MDC's Millions of Dead Cops, and many other such and suches, made us an obvious target for the bored Wyoming Highway Patrol officers. Nothing personal. Nothing personal taken. Basically, your homeland's cops assumed we were all drug addicts. That doesn't surprise me. Franklin and I always had different reactions to cops on the road. His was to stay quiet and do what the cops say, because he's had so many run-ins with the cops in the past. Didn't I tell you this already? No. Are you sure? I'm pretty sure. Anyway, we weren't actually being accused of anything more than suspicious behavior. We smelled badly. We were wearing the same clothes we put on 3 or 4 days earlier. But I don't know what they could have known. I don't know if they could have known this until they pulled us over. And there isn't a law that I know of against bad body odor. The cop standing by the door said we swerved or something like that. It's possible. Skinky was pretty cool, but not a very good driver. It's no surprise that the van broke down in Berkeley. He pushed it way beyond the $5 he paid for it. We left it sitting in front of the Revenge of Tar Pit. The Revenge of Tar Pit? Oh, that's what I call it. The tar pit got condemned, so a few punks who used to stay there found a place a few blocks away and tried to live up to the history of the tar pit. But there was something not quite right about the vibe in that place. Not that the tar pit was a bed of roses, but at least it had an environment that seemed free of hidden agendas. The new breed of Tarpidians had a decadence void of any initiative. Their bands were second-rate and only afterthoughts instead of passions. They subscribed to the more nihilistic punk attitude. They would get drunk, take heroin, steal lawn ornaments from the neighbors, and break them. It was just predictable and empty. I don't care much for that way of thinking. Maybe I just didn't want to visit California anymore. You stay quiet for a few moments, looking over the bass player from the Boys from Wyoming's shoulder, then look back into his eyes. Well, how did you all get home? Skinky and Thurston won the shortest toothpick draw and got cheap flights back to Chicago via every takeoff and landing strip between San Francisco and Milwaukee. I and Dredd took a 54-hour Greyhound bus trip back. I'll never do that again. And Muddle and Mr. Famous cramped into the back seat of a rundown Mustang with a bunch of smelly punks who were taking a joyride across the country. One of them had a 2-foot-high, severely bent pink mohawk primed with crazy glue that would poke Mr. Famous in the eye every time he turned his head. I'm not quite sure which of us had the most fun getting home from that tour. Each adventure had its own unparalleled perks. I'm sure we all had a good time. The bass player from the Boys from Wyoming is staring at you. Although he usually gets your jokes, sometimes your sarcasm goes over his head. It's probably because his critical nature is much more straightforward, like saying, I fucking hate this band. They're a bunch of retards. Instead of, wow, it was cool that band... let me get this right. Wow, it was cool of that band to create their own genre for the musically inept. Or, this tour is worse than kicking shit and drinking mud. Instead of, I really like that part in the set where he sucked. We've gotten good at that. Let me read that again. I really like that part in the set where we sucked. We've gotten really good at that. I think I did say that one time. Does he really think all of you had fun getting home? Perhaps it is because every word you speak is a part of punk history for him, whether it is true or false. It's the heydays, in his opinion, which is strange because the Boys from Wyoming don't much care for the touring. Any semi-tragic road narrative should be yet another excuse for them to stay home. But he just heard you say it was fun, so now maybe he thinks even tragedy was fun in the old days. You must clarify. I was joking. I know you were. Sounds like a week's worth of rubbing your nose in shit. It was pretty terrible. No one had any fun getting home. We lost every cent we had earned. I had to work double, sometimes triple shifts for months until I got financially back on my feet. And yet you tell the story now with such enthusiasm. Are you trying to encourage or discourage him? You look into your drink. I'm not trying to do either. I'm just telling a story. You shake your drink like a magic 8-ball and it comes up. Sure you are. Not trying to do either what? You look back up. The bass player is showing some concern. He has put his sandwich down, leaving his arms available to restrain you or console you. You have just spoken out loud to the cup again. Change the subject. How's your cheesecake? It's a cheesesteak. And then you say, isn't that what I said? A familiar-looking middle-aged man with long, straggly black hair and a felt Robin Hood cap passes by outside the window and doesn't stop. And you don't bother mentioning it to the bass player from the Boys from Wyoming. You see, because the whole second book is basically the first book, but you get different things happening, but within the same circle of me going from the Middle Eastern going from the venue, it was TT and the Bear, to the Middle Eastern Cafe and having food with Cory. So basically the whole book, meaning the book 1, book 2, and book 3, are the same trip I took. You get it 3 different times and sort of 3 different experiences each time. So it's even more confusing. That's why I'm saying like alternative realities and nonlinear time playing and surrealism. It's a crazy book. But I'm having fun reading it to you guys, and gals, maybe. So thank you. Next time we will hit chapter 5. Bye-bye.
Soup and sandwich, soup and sandwich. Have your favorite Campbell soup and sandwich. Any time or weather. Soup and sandwich go together. Soup and sandwich go together. Always delicious. They belong together. Like Mr. and Mrs. Soup and sandwich, soup and sandwich. Have nutritious Campbell soup and sandwich. Any time or weather. Soup and sandwich go together.
Good. Campbell's, of course.